and let's just wait like a minute, probably a minute or two to let people trickle in. Um, yeah. So now you just explained to me basically uh, the scope of your work, and now I totally get why you wanted this to be 8 a.m. before you start your day. It sounds like your days are probably crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I usually like to get this type of stuff out early in the day because if not, I can't really focus too much. But yeah, I certainly have a busy schedule, my friend.
Yeah. It's been a couple of years. It's not just months. So you feeling getting tired, or are you keeping up and happy and feel refreshed?
No, I mean, I've always had a very strong work ethic. I think ever since I was a little kid, I remember starting working when I was like 12 years old, like actually working and trying to like make a living out of it. And so I
Wow.
feel like it's just natural. I just enjoy it. Like I don't make an effort to be honest to work. It's just like I genuinely enjoy what I do, and then just pick doing things that I genuinely like, and so it doesn't feel like a big effort.
Mm. Well, it's the best way to go about it when your job doesn't feel like work. Absolutely. So I think we're ready to start. We have some folks joining one by one. I can see. Thanks anyone who's listening live. Um, Very appreciate it. Either if you're here in Israel and it's your Friday evening, which is a special time here in Israel, or abroad, maybe a PST, and this is very early in the morning for you guys. So very much appreciated. Tiny bit of housekeeping before we jump right into the story we've got to tell over here. Um, I've been told several times that the audio quality here could be better, and this is something I'm fully aware of. The folks at Capiche FM are just great with their new platform that we're using right now, and they're still in their beta. I'm told in less than 2 weeks they're moving to cast over the web, and then the whole experience and audio quality is going to go uh, a lot up and get much better. So thanks, Team Capiche. And without further ado, you're listening to Foot in the Door, where I'm your host, Omer, chatting with friends and colleagues about their careers, how they strategize, how they grew to where they're today, and why they made some decisions. Feel free to use the live chat and type your questions over there, and I'll try to tackle those. Very nice to see people still joining. So, yeah, thanks for tuning in. And now I'm happy to present to you our guest for today, Lucas Fox from Brex'es, who is not only old friend, but also leading talent at Brex'es, and more than that, as he is actually taking care of everything under relations management, and he's going to tell us exactly what that means. A one word of introduction. We basically got to know each other when Lucas, I do have to say, is probably the most ambitious and eyes on the target person I've ever met in my life. And when he got into a program called Minerva, that I'm a graduate of, he reached out because he wanted to know whether this is exactly the best thing for him. So this is the kind of person that nothing's going to stop him. I can tell you that. So thanks for joining us today, Lucas.
It's always a pleasure, my friend. Good to reconnect.
So can you tell us in a couple of words, sort of like how you started your career, actually more focused on robotics and computer science, and then, up until today, doing relations management and talent for Brex'es?
Yeah, sure. So I guess starting my career in robotics and computer science might be an overstatement, but I certainly started studying that. But my background is I'm originally from Brazil. I was born in Rio to a family of multicultural folks, and so I have my mother, who's originally from Venezuela. My grandparents are from Italy. My father is American, but his mother is from Nicaragua. And my parents
Wow.
got married, went to Brazil, and decided to stay in Brazil and had kids in Brazil. So I was born in Brazil because of that. But it's funny because my family is not really Brazilian. And I left Brazil when I was 7 years old. And so I moved to Spain. That's essentially where I spent the majority of my adolescence. I graduated from high school in Spain, and then I started college in the UK. And when I went to college in the UK, I studied sort of like, I did a lot of different classes from like philosophy, politics to robotics and computer science. And I ultimately preferred the more technical side of things. I had sort of taught myself how to code apps the summer before starting college, and I started tinkering around and essentially started a company in school, which I spent about 2 years working on, that led me to eventually drop out of school and just focus on the company. And somehow throughout that journey, I ended up meeting other founders, and I ended up meeting the founders of Brex'es, who at the time had just sold their first company. And they had sold their first company to one of the biggest fintechs in Brazil. At the time, just for context, they had built like the equivalent of Stripe in Brazil, and were very successful. You know, having started a company at 16 years old, at 19 years old, they had sold it. It was a profitable company with 150 people. And so when they sold the company, they decided to go to the U.S. and they went to Stanford, and that's essentially when I met them. And the reason I'm saying that is to give a little bit of context of how I ended up at Brex'es, right? And so when I met the two founders, Enrique and Pedro, we essentially just became good friends, but stayed in touch. And basically about a year after, so this was late 2017, they called me and they said, "Hey, Lucas, we'd love for you to join Brex'es." And at the time when they called me originally, Brex'es had 5 people or something. Brex'es was very small. And they asked me to join the company to basically help build a talent organization, right? Like a recruiting and a people team. And I remember I was on the phone with them, and at the time I had moved back to Brazil, and I asked them, "Why do you want me to do talent or recruiting? I've never done talent or recruiting." And obviously I had done talent and recruiting to the extent that a founder recruits. At the time, I had built an organization that had about 40 people. So that was like kind of like the maximum scale I had operated in. But, Brex'es at the time had 5 people. So it felt tangible. And they were like, "Yeah, we need someone smart that we can trust to join and help us recruit engineers and basically just help us figure this out, because right now we are spending, over 50% of our time recruiting." That was sort of what Enrique was telling me. And Enrique is the founder of Brex'es. And so at the time when they asked me to join the company, I was already set in sort of like working with Enrique and Pedro. Like in my head, Enrique and Pedro had been sort of the two friends that I most admired, and they had a really extraordinary story. And when I met them, I myself was running my own tech company, but when I met them, I knew that they were just a degree of magnitude better, and that really attracted me. Honestly, I just thought that they were really smart, very ambitious, more ambitious than me, smarter than me, and I thought that the only thing that I had that would keep up was my hard work. That's it. It's just the fact that I put in like a lot of hours and I just worked my ass off, and I've always worked my ass off. Until this day, I don't think I'm smarter than the average person or better technically or whatever. I just think I put on more hours and I put in more work. That's honestly it. And so when they asked me to join the company, I was sort of set in going and working with them. I was in Brazil at the time running my organization, so I couldn't just leave. But 6 months later, I actually moved to the US and I joined Brex'es. Originally, I invested in the company to secure a place for me in the company, basically as a sign of interest, saying, "Look, I believe in this company, but I can't join now. I need 6 months to transition my organization." And then 6 months later, I basically moved to the US, moved to San Francisco, and joined the company.
Wow, interesting. It's now this is probably like how you end up right with Brex'es doing talent. But then probably when you guys, I guess, if I were to be in that room where you guys chat about like you joining doing talent, then what was the why? So like when the guys tried to recruit you, what was the pitch? I mean, probably most of the people are listening, and a lot of people in the tech industry know what Brex'es is. But back then, when there were 7 people, what was the pitch like? And what made you say yes?
I mean, to be honest, the pitch didn't really matter to me because it was all about the people. Like Brex could have been whatever, honestly. Like it could have been Crypto Kitties company, and I would have joined. And I think that I made my decision, 95% weighted on the people that I knew at the company. And at the time, this was Enrique and Pedro, the 2 founders. And I've always betted on people. That's always my philosophy on how I make my decisions, at least career-wise. I just like choose to be with the smartest and most ambitious people that I know. That's always how I've optimized things, and it's worked out pretty well. And if you just decide to have very smart and ambitious friends, you just end up in, great places. And I think that if you love working, it's very important to pick people that you love spending time with, that you want to work with, because you're going to spend the majority of your time doing that. So I've always liked working with my friends. I've always liked starting companies with my friends. And so anyways, the original pitch was to build a fintech and to disrupt traditional financial services by first building a corporate credit card for startups, but then building a cash management account for startups, and then building lending products for startups, and eventually scaling to all sort of small, medium businesses in the US, similar to how Square has done very successfully over the last 10, 20 years. And that really appealed to me, sort of becoming the global standard of financial services and building a really, really innovative company alongside some of the people that I most admired really appealed to me. And then the pitch for the role was sort of like, well, Lucas, we just need someone smart who knows how to hustle, who can help us build different teams. And right now, like, we need help with recruiting people, right? We're going to need you to like go on LinkedIn and source and like recruit engineers, and eventually grow into other functions, and eventually, build an org, and then, something else might pop up in some other random part of the organization that we might need your help with. We just need someone that we can trust, that we know will be with us in the long term, that we can count on to be a builder. And so I said, count me on, and I'm sort of like very low ego about it. And I left the organization that I was running at the time that had about 50 people to go and literally go recruit engineers for this, fintech started by 2 Brazilians in San Francisco. And it paid out really well because I've worn, 8 different hats at the company. I've been in multiple different departments, and I've built really strong relationships, obviously a lot of financial upside. So I think I made the right decision.
And so those, can you tell me a bit about well, you say like sourcing engineers on LinkedIn, but probably you had different ways to go about. So let's just put things in context. This is not just like recruiting 15, 20 people a year, just like a classic startup or something, right? So you guys more sort of like you joined, it was at the ballpark of 5, 10 people, and how many people are now with Brex?
Yeah, so basically when I got the original offer to join Brex had about 5 to 10 people. When I actually joined full time, when I moved to the US and was able to start living situation out, et cetera, moving from Brazil to the US, Brex had probably 50 people. And the company grew from 50 people in 2018 to over 500 people right now. And so from 50 people to about 200, 250, I was in the sort of like recruiting talent organization. And we saw some massive growth, right? And it was really interesting sort of building processes and hiring people that would allow us to continue hiring and scaling without lowering our bar for talent. Because I think that's the struggle. When you're a fast growing company and you need to hire a lot of people, what happens is the urge to hire overcomes the sort of urge to keep your bar very high. And so you start kind of like lowering your bar. That's the natural kind of tension. And so the struggle is, how can you keep your bar extremely high while scaling really fast? And it's very tough to do that, but it was certainly very, very fun to build.
So how? So let's get into the nitty-gritty magic and the details of what works. So you've done this something like 3 years by now, and obviously you were able to bring more than 400 people that are top notch. Like, based on this experience, what do you think absolutely works? What do you think absolutely doesn't work? If anyone within the talent management vertical in their company listening right now, what should they know?
Yeah. And for context, I think nothing is done alone. You need a team, and you need to leverage people. And then the second thing is, I was actively involved in sort of the recruiting and people organization up until we had about 250 people. And then I was asked by our founders to go help launch our newest product at the time, which was Brex'es Cash. And so that's a separate story that if you want to get into, we can certainly get into. But from a talent perspective, in my opinion, what works very well is when you have a very clear process in how you want to recruit. I think that the first thing is, when you open a new role and you want to hire someone, rather than thinking about it from role title or role description, think about, what does this person need to do? And think about, what are the absolute skill sets that this person needs in order to accomplish this? Because many times you can hire someone who has a lot of potential and is very smart and is very hardworking to do roles that they have never done before. Other times you need to hire people that have absolutely done that job. And if you want to build a sales organization, it's very important to hire a sales leader that has already scaled a sales organization. And if you're planning on scaling your sales organization in the next 18 months from 2 people to 100 people, you should hire a sales leader who has done that at a previous company, likely a previous tech company, and has seen that degree of scale, right? So I think there are some roles where you want to hire someone who has already done it. And then there are roles that you don't need to hire someone that has already done it, but you can hire for potential. And I think that being able to clearly separate those two out is very important. And then the second thing that you need to be able to do is, you need to be able to, first, have a lot of great people that you're speaking to. I think that we had a lot of luck early on, because we were very known in sort of the tech community and in the Y Combinator community. And then we launched our first product in sort of June 2018, and we became a very well-known company, and we were one of the fastest companies to reach $1 billion valuation. And so we had a really strong brand that helped, because when we messaged people on LinkedIn, or when we launched an online application, we got a lot of interest, right? Like, our response rates was very high. People wanted to find out more about Brex'es. So I think the top of funnel part, we did really, really well. And that's, in some way, we're lucky, just because we had a great brand. And also, we had raised a lot of money. And so we had a lot of money to hire great people, right? So we could really hire anyone. And I think that's one of the great things about the experience that I had on Brex'es, is we really, really had our bar extremely high. When we needed to hire someone, we'd think to ourselves, who is the best person in the world to do this? And then we would go for that person, and then go down from that. And so I think that we had the privilege of having the brand and the potential of growth, and also the capital to hire some of the best people in the world. And then the last thing that I'll say is sort of the magic, to use your phrase, of turning recruiting into a science. I think a lot of people that come from traditional HR backgrounds, they think of recruiting as like an art. And I think it is to some extent, because I think any time that you're evaluating potential for human beings, it's such a complex thing to do, that there is an art to it. But I think that you can make it into a science. And the way that we did that at Brex'es is that for every role that we were hiring for, we would unpack the role into skill sets that we needed for that role. And we would essentially build sort of recruiting interview processes to quantify what is the level of empathy, for example, that this person has. If we were hiring someone for our customer support team, we needed someone that had empathy, just like raw empathy, right? We didn't care necessarily about their previous background. We just cared that they were like an empathetic person. And,
so how do you So how do you check something like that? Well, let's take. I love this example. So empathy. How would you check someone's empathy skills or empathy level?
I think the way that if you want to go into specifically empathy, you interview for empathy, is through specific sort of like interview questions and also through specific workshops. And a lot of the things that you have to look for in empathy is you have to look for people that just genuinely care about other people, right? People that like genuinely care about their family, their friends, people that genuinely just care about the world. And it's very clear when you're speaking to someone that has high empathy by the way that they talk about their experiences, they talk about group projects they've worked for, they talk about their peers, they look at you in the eyes. And I feel like there's a science to it that we narrowed down into sort of like how people can respond to certain questions, and we really broke it down into science. And then there's also an art of sort of things you can't really explain, you know? For example, something that I feel is more of an art than a science is I sit with someone, and within 2 minutes of conversation, just by looking at their eyes and the way that they look at me in the eyes, I can have a very good sensation of whether the person has a high degree of empathy or not, just by the way they look at you and they smile. Now, that's not really a science. That's more of an art. So that's more on the art sort of camp. But there is this whole side of the science camp. And what we did is we narrowed that down for 30, 40 different skill sets. And the way that we would build roles is, okay, we think about role, we think about the skill sets, and then we already had all these interview sort of built to identify for that skill set, and we broke it down into a science. And so what we did is we made everybody at Brex sort of a recruiter, trained them on that, and it helped us scale a lot faster, right? Because we relied on a lot of the people that we had already hired to then interview other people. And anyways, that's sort of in short a lot of the way that we did it.
Mm-hmm. So you're looking for compartmentalize and sort of like create like a components of an interview, and then and by having those components, you're able to empower your existing manpower to interview faster and better.
Exactly. We used to call them Lego blocks. Every role had Lego blocks. And then basically it was just much easier to build roles and interview for roles. And the problem is when you're in a fast growing company, a lot of the people that you hire early on end up becoming like managers and leaders. And not everybody has a lot of management experience. Not everybody knows how to recruit and to interview. And so what ends up happening is when you start bringing not very senior or experienced managers, you start seeing your bar go down. So it's very important to put these guardrails in place so that your bar doesn't go down, right? And so we kind of did this out of necessity, and it worked really well in my opinion.
Wow. And what are those like guardrails? So would you have like a committee for like decision making, or how do you make sure that you know what's happening, that there are no big mistakes, you're not losing candidates, and what do you care? What are you more cautious about, false positives or false negatives?
So to answer first the guardrails, I think that there are different guardrails. There are guardrails that you put in the interview process, like training interviewers or having what we call like a culture interview, which is essentially the final interview that only very few people at the company can actually conduct, because what you're assessing for are sort of like some of the key values that we believe at the company. For example, one of our key values is growth mindset. Like we really care about people that have a growth mindset, that they always want to learn, that they always will take feedback, and they just strive to be the best version of themselves, right? In all senses, professionally, personally, intellectually. And so that's an example of one of our values. We have a couple of other values, but the point is one of the guardrails that we put in place in the interview process was ensuring that we had folks, and if they were a handful of folks. It started out with our founders, Pedro and Enrique, and then we had one person in engineering, one person in the business side. I did a lot of the culture interviews, and eventually it grew as the company scaled to a couple of other people throughout the company. And essentially that was a very, very good guardrail that allowed us to keep hiring people that had the right culture fit. And the other thing is in regards to how do you set guardrails throughout the life cycle of the employee? And that's essentially how you create a system for how the manager interacts with the employee. You have performance reviews. You have monthly, what we call reflects, where you evaluate the performance of the person. You tell them whether they're exceeding your expectation, at expectation, or below your expectation. You have a system where that data trickles up and you're able to analyze it at the top. You'll also have ways of having peer feedback. So there's the 360 feedback that a peer can give you every quarter. And there's also sort of culture surveys that we do where we can see how happy the employee is, how much the employee likes their manager, how much the employee likes their team. So based on all this data, we can determine who are the good leaders, who are the bad leaders, who are the good employees, who are the bad employees. And so you can sort of, clean the organization in that sense.
How would you go about creating the methodology for like, let's call the whole thing assessment, right? I know this is something, obviously in a cynical way, like folks in the big techs, you whatever you might call it, Google, Facebook, they have the peer reviews, and people are spending days doing those peer reviews. In some big organizations, the holy grail is impact, right? So everything is sort of like oriented around, am I making an impact? How can I improve that what I do has big impact? And those things are a good combination, right, of science and art, and really hard to grasp. So how do you guys think about it? How do you guys set the pillars for this to work?
I mean, you shouldn't reinvent the wheel. Like, there are a lot of very smart people and good companies out there that have done great things. Like, well, that's one thing for sure that we're sort of not proud of, like inventing everything from scratch and doing everything from scratch. Like, for sure, leverage other companies. You should, sit in the shoulders of giants, as they say. And so, for example, a book that really inspired the way that we look at people management is the classic book by Andy Grove, High Output Management, right? So a very classic book in management that sort of walks through a lot of the one-on-one structures and 360 feedback structure. And so there are a lot of books out there, and there are a lot of mentors and founders and investors that have taught us from a young age how to do things. And so we don't have to necessarily reinvent the wheels. It's just really sitting in the shoulders of giants, in my opinion.
Cool. Do you remember like a specific position that was just really hard to find the right person for, or generally a position that is always hard to find someone for?
Many. I think obviously, naturally, when you're a young company, you're building your executive team. That's very hard. And I think one of the advice that I would give is work with the best headhunting company for executive searches. I think that building a team in-house to hire like the bulk of the people that you need is very important. But for your exec searches, like the best people to run your engineering organization, your people organization, your product organization, like the best searches are usually going to come from the best headhunters. And the reason for that is the best people are very, very hard to convince to leave their existing job. Because if you think about it, like great people, great people, they don't apply for jobs. Great people all throughout their life, they get pulled into one job to the other by their peers, by their friends, by their ex-bosses. So great people, they're never like applying or looking for a job. They just get pulled from one opportunity to the next. That's how their life is, right? And so if you think about like a great exec has all the opportunities in the world. They can go to any company. And the way that you can identify some of the best execs is by identifying people that are essentially really good and really smart, have had an amazing track record, but are very hungry for more, right? You wanna hire someone. To give you an example, if you are looking for a CTO, someone to run your engineering organization, you can look at your competitor and say, yeah, I want to hire the CTO of my competitor. But what ultimately happens is the CTO of your competitor has already done the job that you're asking for them to do. Like, they've already scaled the engineering organization of a 50-person company to a 500-person company. Like, why would they do that? That would be like a step back, right? So what you want to do is you want to identify like the second person, the second the second person in that company that runs the engineering organization who like wants his boss's job, and you hire that person to come run your organization. So I think it's very important for you to understand these like high growth employees, these employees that got promoted multiple different times at high growth companies that are not the most senior person in that organization, to then come to your company to run the organization, right? And you can do that for product, you do that for engineering, you do that for all, for finance. And all of our execs at Brex have that profile. They're all amazing, and they have that profile of having been sort of like the top performers of their areas in really, really great companies, but never being the number one in their departments, but then coming to Brex and being the number one. Because then you give them the ambition and sort of the real, like, they want to succeed, right? They haven't made it yet. In their head, they're still striving to make it, and they're pushing themselves at their limit. And so I think that that's something that we did really well. And a lot of the execs that we hired came from headhunter companies, because these headhunters, they have identified and built relationship with some of the most senior people in the Silicon Valley across 10, 20 years. And so they have a lot of sort of like insider information about like who is happy, who is not, who's thinking of potentially leaving, who could be a good fit. And I think for exec hires, it's very important. And so I think that those were some of our hardest hires. One in particular is we were trying to hire someone to run our relationship management team. And that was very hard. Remember, we searched for this person for almost a year. And wow. And that was clearly one of the hires that we struggled a lot. And ultimately, I ended up stepping into that role and sort of running that organization. That's what I'm doing until today. And so I think that, every role is different, but certainly would advise for the headhunter for some of the top exec roles.
That's an important tip. Thanks. It's interesting. And we actually have a question from the audience here from Stu, our listener Stu. So thanks for pitching your question. And he's asking you things that you realized after joining that you hadn't realized before joining Brex that made you even more bullish on the idea and what the company is doing. And I would even say what changed within the company throughout, since you joined, not on the talent side, but on the, on how's the business and where do you think Brex'es is going in 2021 or even more? And I also know that you guys went remote first, which is a big change as well. So yeah, what do you think the future is like, and what sort of like the trajectory looks like?
Yeah. So I think that, well, first, I spent half of my time at Brex in the sort of talent and people organization, and the other second half up till today on the revenue side, right? So launching new products and driving sort of the revenue organization. And essentially, I think something that really made me bullish about Brex is the speed of execution that we have, especially with launching products. I think that's very important because one of the things that I feel make high growth companies very successful is the speed at which they can launch products. Because what happens is when you launch a product and it's successful and you prove a market out, you end up having a bunch of competitors. And that happened with Brex, right? We have a bunch of competitors today that were born because they saw that there's a huge opportunity out there, right? And what happens is in order for you to continue winning, you have to be the first at innovating, at launching the new product, at launching these new features. And I think that one of the things that I look for in great companies, and obviously something that I think Brex has, is speed of execution, right? We launch product very fast. And I think that is very important. It's not just about building great products. Sometimes it's about speed. If you don't launch a product fast enough, you will lose that to the competition and you will lose momentum. So I think that is certainly something. And to complement that, I think something that helped us become an organization that is very fast is the quality of our product organization. I think that we have a really, really strong product organization. And in particular, something that the product organization, especially our product leader, our product exec, brought to the company is the culture of written decision making. I think about a year and a half ago, we shifted into sort of like a written culture. And a lot of this was sort of built upon the foundation of Amazon's written culture. Really interesting culture, which I recommend everybody read more about. But essentially, we came to a point where we were making decisions in writing. And so the way that Brex operates is, I'll give you an example with product. When we want to launch a product, when we want to ship a new feature, when we want to do something that will change, some sort of back-end system or a front-end sort of user interface, we have a written process where the driver for that decision has to write a memo. They have to write a doc, a 6-page maximum memo that talks about their decision, the details, and it's a document driven by the PM, but with collaboration from the engineers, from the engineering managers, from the sales counterpart, from the marketing folks, and everybody gets together and they write a document around how to launch or change a feature. And we took that concept from product to every other organization at the company right now. So today, the way that finance makes their decisions is through this written culture as well, or the way that the go-to-market organization makes decisions around launching product or changing some sort of internal system within sales is also through this written decision making. And that allows us to just make decisions very fast, but very high quality decisions. Because what happens is in a fast growth environment, sometimes you have to make a lot of decisions. But if you have decision making constrained to a few individuals, executives, that might not have the full context of the details of a lot of the problems, you end up making the wrong decisions. So you need to have a process where you trickle down decision making towards the company in a very distributed way, where the people that have the most context are the drivers of those decisions. And then there is an approver who decides whether we do this decision or not. And usually that's an executive of that organization. But the way that we make decisions is through writing, and it's very efficient, and it allows us to move very fast. So to close this out, there are no decisions at Brex that are made in closed rooms. There are no decisions that, two people come together, they decide on something, make a decision that influences the company, and that's it, right? There's no this concept of like, oh, let's have a meeting and then make a decision. Usually we write a document with the decision. Everybody reads it. We have a very transparent written culture at Brex where everybody can read any sort of document. Everything's very, very open, and we trust our employees. And anyone can comment on these documents that we write. And essentially, when a decision is made, it's communicated in writing. Every week, we have a process for this reading and reviewing the week's docs and making decisions. And the important thing is it allows for anyone to contribute to decision making, right? An engineer that started a week ago can contribute to a very important decision, and they can contribute to a document. They can write a memo. They can put forth their idea. So it's a very meritocratic system because it allows people that are great executors and great communicators to really convey their ideas and execute. And so I think that is likely the single thing that allowed us to become a very fast executing organization. And in addition to that, that's what fueled our sort of desire to go remote first, to sort of touch upon the point that you made, because it allows us to hire anyone from anywhere in the world. When I was in the recruiting and people organization, one of the constraints that we had was we need to hire people in San Francisco or New York. And I feel like if you open your funnel to all of the United States or all of the world, like now we're hiring engineers in Brazil and they're remote engineers. And so I feel like that helped us And also it makes the company just more efficient, right? People are happier actually now they're remote first. And we've already built all the processes internally to operate really effectively as a remote first company. So I think that's a long answer to your question, but hopefully that was somewhat useful.
No, that was really interesting. Yeah, I gather that you guys you're operating in an extremely flat sort of organization. So things bubble up very fast, and the speed of the entire organization is just much faster because of those principles in place. Really interesting. So the written sort of like template for decision making within product. If you guys want to make one of those templates that you use publicly available for some for folks to learn from you guys, then feel free to pass it to us, and we will make sure to link it on the show's page and follow up with that if that is possible. I'm sure many people can enjoy something like that. And so, shifting gears a tiny bit, each one of our guests get to recommend one tool that he or she uses that most people don't use. It might be underrated for the wrong reasons. So what would that be for you?
Yeah, and just before I answer that, there's this really, really interesting blog that we wrote called Building Brex'es that I really recommend everybody take a look at. It's a really interesting blog that we wrote, and different people at the company write, different posts in different weeks, which essentially covered topics that we would have found extremely, extremely helpful at the beginning of the company if we knew about. And so there's a blog post about increasing the quality of our decisions. That's sort of explains how we make decisions in a written format. There's a lot of other, sort of interesting posts from, how we run our board meetings to, essentially how to scale a compensation program. So really, really interesting. It's really sort of tactical and really helpful. And anyone here, I'm sure, who's working at, a tech company or just want to bring some of these efficiencies to their own organizations, I recommend reading.
That would be great.
And then the second thing around a tool. Okay. So you're asking for a tool that I think is underrated. Well, for one, I'm going to give a sort of a software and then a hardware example. The software one, I'm going to give a very basic example, which is Google Docs. A lot of the decision-making framework and memos that we write are in Google Docs. Like, they're not complex softwares that you need to spend a lot of money on. It's like really simple stuff for free that Google gives to you. So I think that, sometimes when you want to run an organization efficiently, you don't need to depend on complex tools. You sometimes just need the most simple things. And so Google Docs for me is really, really great because it's a tool that allows you to write memos and work in collaboration with, your colleagues and with the rest of the company. And it's very efficient. It's very simple, right? So that's my first answer in regards to tools. The second is, so there's this gadget that I've been using for likely 2 years, and it's pretty popular in the Bay Area. I think that when I started using it, it wasn't that popular and people thought it was really cool. I think now it's becoming more and more popular, but maybe to your audiences, they don't know that much, which is there's this really cool gadget called an Aura Ring that essentially tracks your sleep. And so it's like a Fitbit, but except for it being a wristband, it's a ring. But it's a very, very well-built hardware device. It's really, really good. And it tracks your sleep very effectively. It tracks your temperature, your blood pressure. It's a really interesting gadget if you're into sort of like optimizing your health. And I'm super into optimizing my health and like sleeping well, eating well, exercising. Like I definitely want to live for over 100 years. And I really like the Aura ring. It's also a really cool ring. It like looks pretty good. But I think the coolest part of it is just you tracking your sleep and your health on a daily basis, and being able to improve it. I think it's a great gadget.
Cool. Yeah, I've heard it's the best tech to monitor your health during the day. It's the most precise, right? Did you get any insights from it that you were able to apply? So for your sleep or for your eating or any aspect of your day to day?
Well, I think that there are two things. One, it just forces you to look at the data. And so it just, when you go out with your friends and you go, to bed really late and you sleep 5-6 hours, or if you drink even a glass of wine, you see it in the data. You see that you have less REM sleep,
Really?
and you see that you're not sleeping as effectively. So I think that it just forces you to look at the data and think through, is this the most health conscious way of living? And so I think that's one thing. And then the other, it tells you a little bit around sort of when you sleep well or when you don't sleep well, and it reaffirms that. So you wake up a little tired and you can look at your phone, you can see, yeah, that's true. Like you did not sleep very well, you didn't go into deep sleep very much. And then you can ask yourself, is this because of something that's happening to me physically or emotionally, or is this work-wise? And I think you can just start to reflect on, maybe I should deal with something else in my life, right? And the other thing is, I'm really into walking now, which is interesting because I've always been very into sort of like extreme sports, and I love like rock climbing and things that are very physically challenging. But I'm really into walking now. I try to walk like 1 to 2 hours a day. Try to take some meetings while I'm walking, and it's really good for you. Like walking is very, very healthy for you. And I track my steps through the Aura ring, and so it also allows me to be accountable. And I also like to share the number of steps that I'm doing with my friends because we hold each other accountable. And so I feel like that's also something that it helps me with. But I guess, yeah.
Nice. Wow, that's 2 to 1 hours is impressive. All right, so there's a very long way ahead for you, like any other day. So it sounds a huge year for Brex'es. This is so you guys are entering the 4th year, right? And
yeah,
it's going remote and getting more products out. It's going to be really interesting. What's the best ways for listeners to get in touch with you if they want and have any questions?
I think LinkedIn is pretty easy. I review sort of, invites that I get or direct messages that I get. So if you want to just ping me on LinkedIn, you can find me there. I think my name is in this podcast, just Lucas Fox. Or if you want to find me on Twitter, it's also just Lucas Fox. Hopefully you'll find me. That's probably the most effective way.
Perfect. Thanks for joining us, taking the time, telling us the ins and outs, the tips, the tricks, the to-dos and not to-dos of how to get the best talent to join your company, and how to grow it, and how to plan a career based on the people that you want to be with and the values that you believe in. It was really interesting, really insightful. Thanks much.
Always a pleasure, Omar. Let me know if you want to chat again soon.
Sure. Thanks anyone who tuned in. We've got folks still with us. Really appreciate it. As any other week, we'll let you know when we have our next guest next week. Really interesting folks are getting in line to join us in the show, and we'll be again next week. Have a great weekend, anyone.
Yo.